Have you ever been judged before you could even speak? Joanne Lewis, a 68-year-old black woman, felt that sting deep in her bones. For years, she'd lived quietly in her upscale Atlanta apartment, her only companion a scruffy terrier named Socks. But now she faced a courtroom accused by her luxury complex of illegal dog ownership and smell. The words hit like a slapper home, her peace, her loyal friend, all at risk. Joanne's heart raced as she clutched Sock's leash, her eyes scanning the cold faces around her. She was no troublemaker, just a retiree who'd raised 3 kids and buried a husband. Yet here she was, painted as a nuisance. Her blackness subtly weaponized in whispers about standards and odors. The injustice burned. Socks wasn't just a pet, he was her lifeline, her reason to smile. Could they really take him away? A reversal loomed, a truth waiting to break free, but for now Joanne stood alone, her dignity under siege. How's your heart today, friends? Let's walk with Joanne, feel her fight, and see how one small dog could turn a tide. Joanne Lewis had always been a woman of grace, the kind who'd offer you sweet tea and a smile even on her worst day. At 68, she carried herself with the quiet strength of someone who'd weathered life's storms, raising 3 children through lean years, nursing her husband through cancer, and now living alone in a world that felt colder than it used to. Her apartment in the Crestwood Towers, a gleaming high-rise in Atlanta's Buckhead district, was her sanctuary. The building was all glass and marble with doormen in crisp uniforms and a lobby that smelled of lavender. It was the kind of place where wealth whispered in every polished surface, and Joanne, with her modest pension and thrift store sweaters, sometimes felt like an outsider. Her 1-bedroom unit on the 12th floor was cozy, filled with memories, framed photos of her kids, a faded quilt her mother had sewn, and Socks, a wiry terrier with mismatched ears and a bark that could wake the dead. Joanne had found him 6 years ago shivering in an alley behind a diner. He'd been a scrawny thing, all ribs and fleas, but his eyes held a spark that spoke to her. She named him Socks for the white patches on his paws and brought him home, never imagining he'd become her heart's anchor. The Crestwood Towers had strict rules, no pets without approval, and approval was a labyrinth of fees and inspections. Joanne had tried to register Socks, but the board, led by a curt man named Richard Hargrove, rejected her application. Pet odors compromise our standards. He'd written his letter sharp with condescension. Joanne suspected it wasn't just about Socks. She'd seen the way Hargrove's eyes lingered on her, the way he'd purse his lips when she spoke at tenant meetings. She was one of the few black residents in a building where most faces were white, and the subtle slights, ignored greetings, raised eyebrows piled up like stones. Still, Joanne kept Socks hiding him during inspections, sneaking him out for walks at dawn. He was her companion through lonely nights, curling up beside her as she watched old movies or read her Bible. His playful yips could pull her from the darkest moods, and when her arthritis flared, he'd rest his head on her lap as if he knew. She'd whisper to him, "You're my good boy," and he'd wag his tail, his trust in her absolute. The trouble started 6 months ago. A neighbor, Mrs. Evelyn Carter, a white woman with a penchant for gossip, complained about dog smells in the hallway. Joanne knew it was nonsense. Socks was bathed weekly and her apartment was spotless, but Evelyn's complaint gave Hargrove ammunition. He sent letters, then fines, each one more threatening. "Remove the animal or face eviction," the last one read. Joanne's stomach churned. Eviction meant losing her home of 15 years, her stability, her memories. She wrote back pleading her case, but Hargrove was unmoved. Finally, he escalated the matter to court, suing her for breaching the lease. The courtroom loomed in Joanne's mind as she prepared for the hearing. She ironed her best dress, a navy blue number she'd worn to her daughter's graduation, and polished her shoes until they shone. Socks sensed her nerves, nudging her hand with his wet nose. "We'll be all right, won't we?" she murmured, but her voice trembled. She'd hired a lawyer, a kind young woman named Maya, who worked pro bono, but the odds felt stacked against her. Hargrove had money connections and a building full of tenants who'd rather stay silent than challenge him. The morning of the hearing, Joanne rode the elevator down with Socks tucked in a carrier. The lobby was quiet, save for the doorman who gave her a sympathetic nod. Outside, Atlanta hummed with summer heat, the air thick with jasmine and exhaust. She hailed a cab to the courthouse, her hands shaking as she paid the driver. The Fulton County Courthouse was a hulking building of gray stone, its steps worn by decades of footsteps. Inside, the air was cool and sterile, the halls echoing with the clack of heels and the murmur of voices. Joanne took her seat in the courtroom, Socks carrier at her feet. The judge, a stern white man named Judge Whitaker, peered over his glasses as the room filled. Hargrove sat across the aisle, his suit crisp, his face smug. Beside him was Evelyn Carter, her lips pursed in disapproval. Maya squeezed Joanne's hand, whispering, "We've got this." but Joanne's eyes darted to the other side where a police officer, Officer Daniel Brooks, stood as a witness for the complex. His presence puzzled her. He'd never been involved before, but his cold stare sent a chill down her spine. As the hearing began, Hargrove's lawyer painted Joanne as a rule breaker, a tenant who'd flouted the lease and disrupted the building's pristine environment. Evelyn testified about the foul dog odor, her voice dripping with disdain. Joanne's chest tightened. She wanted to shout that it was a lie, that Socks was cleaner than Evelyn's gossip, but Maya urged her to stay calm. Her turn would come. For now, she sat her dignity, battered her faith in justice, wavering as the room seemed to close in around her. The courtroom air grew heavier as the case against Joanne Lewis unfolded. She sat rigid, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, while Socks whimpered softly in his carrier. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting stark shadows on the mahogany benches. Judge Whitaker's expression remained unreadable, his pen scratching notes as Hargrove's lawyer, a slick man named Mr. Pearson, piled on accusations. Ms. Lewis has shown blatant disregard for the Crestwood Towers regulations. Pearson declared, his voice smooth but cutting. Her unauthorized pet has caused distress and diminished property value. Joanne's jaw clenched. Distress. The only distress was hers sitting here like a criminal for loving her dog. Pearson called Officer Daniel Brooks to the stand, and Joanne's unease deepened. Brooks, a broad-shouldered white man with a buzz cut and a sneer, swaggered forward, his badge glinting under the lights. Maya leaned close, whispering, "He's here to testify about a noise complaint. Stay strong." But Joanne's stomach twisted. She'd never met Brooks yet. His presence felt personal, like a storm cloud aimed at her. Brooks swore, in his voice gruff. On April 12th, I responded to a call from Crestwood Towers regarding a disturbance, barking loud enough to wake the whole floor. He fixed his gaze on Joanne, his eyes cold. I arrived and found the defendant's dog, a mangy thing, yapping uncontrollably. It's a nuisance, just like its owner. The word owner dripped with contempt, and a murmur rippled through the courtroom. Joanne's face burned. She wanted to stand to defend Socks, but Maya's hand on her arm kept her seated. Pearson nodded, encouraging Brooks. "And what was the defendant's response, officer?" Defiant Brooks said, leaning forward. She claimed the dog was hers and refused to comply with the complex's rules. Said it was her right to keep it. He smirked, adding, "That dog's as stupid as it looks, causing trouble for no reason." The insult landed like a punch, and Joanne's breath caught. Socks wasn't stupid, he was her protector, her joy. The courtroom felt smaller, the walls pressing in as Brooks's words echoed. Judge Whitaker frowned but said nothing, his silence amplifying Joanne's isolation. Maya objected, her voice sharp. "Your Honor, the officer's personal insults are irrelevant." Whitaker sustained the objection, but the damage was done. Brooks' mockery hung in the air, and Joanne felt eyes boring into her. Hargrove's smug satisfaction. Evelyn Carter's pinched disapproval. She was a black woman in a room of white faces. Her character dissected her home on the line. The unfairness clawed at her, but she straightened her spine, drawing on the resilience that had carried her through harder days. Pearson moved on, calling Hargrove to testify. The apartment manager took the stand, his silver hair gleaming, his tone polished but icy. "Ms. Lewis's actions undermine the community we've built," he said. "Crestwood Towers is a place of elegance, and her pet's presence, its smell, its noise, violates our standards." He paused, glancing at Joanne with a look that felt like judgment on her very existence. "We've given her ample warnings. Eviction is the only solution." Joanne's heart pounded. Eviction. The word conjured images of packing boxes, leaving her photos, her quilt, her memories. Where would she go? Her pension couldn't cover another place in Buckhead, and her kids scattered across the country couldn't take her in. Socks would be sent to a shelter or worse. She blinked back tears, refusing to let Hargrove see her break. Maya cross-examined her questions precise. "Mr. Hargrove, can you provide evidence of this alleged smell?" Hargrove faltered, admitting no formal tests had been conducted, and the noise complaints Maya pressed. How many tenants besides Mrs. Carter reported issues? Hargrove's answer was vague. Only Evelyn had formally complained. Maya's points landed, but Joanne sensed the judge's skepticism. Hargrove's wealth and status carried weight, and she was just a retiree with a dog. The tension escalated as Pearson introduced photos of the hallway outside Joanne's apartment, claiming stains from Socks. The images were grainy, the marks ambiguous, but Pearson spun them as proof of negligence. Joanne whispered to Maya, "Those aren't from Socks." "I scrubbed that floor myself." Maya nodded, promising to challenge the evidence, but Joanne's hope flickered. The deck seemed stacked, each testimony tightening the noose around her life. As the morning wore on, the courtroom's hostility seeped into Joanne's bones. She thought of her mother, who'd faced down landlords and bosses with unyielding dignity. "Hold your head high," she'd say. Joanne tried, but Brooks's cruel words, "stupid dog-defiant owner," replayed in her mind. She glanced at Socks's carrier, his small form curled inside. He wasn't a nuisance. He was her family. Yet the world saw them both as problems to be erased. The session broke for lunch and Joanne stepped outside, the Atlanta sun blinding after the courtroom's chill. She let Socks out to stretch his tail wagging despite the tension. A few passers-by smiled at him, but Joanne felt exposed as if Hargrove's accusations clung to her skin. She fed Socks a treat, whispering, "We're not done fighting, boy." But as she returned to the courtroom, Brooks's smirk greeted her, and her resolve wavered. The conflict was far from over, and the worst was yet to come. The courtroom clock ticked past 2 p.m., each second a hammer against Joanne Lewis's fraying nerves. The afternoon session had resumed, and the air felt charged as if the room itself held its breath. Joanne sat beside Maya, her hands folded tightly, Socks carrier a quiet comfort at her feet. Judge Whitaker's stern gaze swept the room, signaling the defense's turn to present their case. Maya rose, her voice steady but urgent, ready to counter the barrage of accusations from Hargrove and Officer Brooks. Joanne's heart thudded. She knew this was her chance, but the weight of the morning's hostility pressed down like a stone. Maya began by calling Joanne to the stand. Joanne smoothed her navy dress, her steps deliberate as she approached the witness box. The room seemed to tilt, faces blurring into a sea of judgment, but she focused on Maya's encouraging nod. Swearing in her voice was soft but clear, carrying the weight of her 68 years. "I'm Joanne Lewis, and Socks is my family," she began. "He's no nuisance. He's a good dog, and I've done my best to follow the rules." Her words were simple, but they resonated, a quiet defiance against the lies spun around her. Maya guided her through the story, finding Socks trying to register him, the constant rejections from Hargrove. Joanne admitted to keeping Socks despite the rules, her voice catching. "I couldn't give him up. He's all I have some days." She spoke of her clean apartment, her care for Socks, and the lack of evidence for any smell. The courtroom listened, and for a moment, Joanne felt seen her truth cutting through the haze of accusations. But the turning point came unexpectedly. Maya called a surprise witness, Mr. Harold Thompson, a 72-year-old white retiree from the 12th floor. Joanne's eyes widened. She knew Harold, a quiet man who'd always waved in the hallway, but they'd never been close. He shuffled to the stand, his cane tapping the floor, his face etched with determination. Harold swore in his voice, gravelly but firm, and began to speak his words, shifting the room's gravity. "I'm here because of that dog," Harold said, pointing toward Socks carrier. 3 months ago, I had a heart attack in the middle of the night. I was alone, couldn't reach my phone, couldn't call for help. I thought I was done for. The courtroom stilled, every eye on him. But Socks, he started barking, screaming like I'd never heard. It woke me, sure, but it also woke Joanne. She came running, banged on my door, and when I didn't answer, she called 911. Paramedics got there in time because of her and that dog. Joanne's breath caught tears prickling her eyes. She remembered that night vividly, Socks' frantic barks, her own panic as she dialed for help. She'd stayed with Harold until the ambulance arrived, holding his hand, praying he'd pull through. But she'd never thought of it as heroic, just neighborly. Now Harold's voice carried her actions into the light, reframing Socks from a nuisance to a savior. Harold continued, his gaze sweeping the room. "I heard what that officer said, calling Socks stupid. That dog's smarter than half the people in this building. And Joanne, she's a good woman, always has been. You want to talk about standards? She's the standard." His words landed like a gavel, and Joanne saw a flicker of unease cross Hargrove's face. Even Brooks shifted in his seat, his smirk gone. Maya seized the moment, her questions sharp. "Mr. Thompson, did you ever notice a foul odor from Ms. Lewis's apartment?" Harold shook his head. "Never. Her place is cleaner than mine." The gallery murmured, and Maya pressed on. "And the barking, did it disturb you?" Harold chuckled. "Only when it saved my life." The laughter that followed was soft but warm, a crack in the room's tension. Pearson tried to rattle Harold on cross-examination, suggesting he was biased, but Harold was unshaken. "I'm telling the truth," he said simply. "That's all." As he stepped down, he met Joanne's eyes, offering a small nod. She mouthed a silent thank you, her heart swelling with gratitude. For the first time, she wasn't alone in this fight. Maya called another witness, a young maintenance worker named Luis, who testified that the hallway stains were from a leaky pipe, not Socks. The evidence chipped away at Hargrove's case, but it was Harold's story that lingered, a beacon of hope in the storm. Joanne felt the shift. Judge Whitaker's pen paused, his eyes thoughtful. The gallery, once cold, now buzzed with whispers of sympathy. As Maya wrapped up, she addressed the court, her voice rising. This case isn't about a dog or a lease, it's about fairness. Ms. Lewis is a model tenant targeted for who she is and what she loves. Socks isn't a problem, he's a hero. Joanne's chest tightened, pride mixing with fear. The tide was turning, but the judge's ruling loomed, and Brooks' cruel words still stung a reminder of the hatred she faced. The session adjourned for a brief recess, and Joanne stepped into the hall, Socks trotting beside her. A few spectators smiled, one even patting Socks' head. Harold approached, his eyes kind. "I owed you," he said. "You and that dog gave me a second chance." Joanne hugged him, her voice choked. "You gave us one too." The moment fortified her, but the battle wasn't over. The climax awaited, and with it a chance to reclaim her dignity. Strength surged through Joanne Lewis as she re-entered the courtroom, Harold's words still echoing in her heart. His testimony had cracked the foundation of Hargrove's case, and the warmth of his hug lingered a shield against the cold stares of her accusers. Socks trotted at her side, his small paws clicking on the polished floor, oblivious to the storm about to break. The gallery buzzed with anticipation, and even Judge Whitaker seemed more attentive, his pen poised above his notepad. Maya squeezed Joanne's hand, whispering, "This is it. We've got them on the ropes." But Joanne knew the fight wasn't over. Hargrove's smugness and Brooks's venom still loomed, and the judge's ruling could shatter her world. The session resumed, and Maya delivered her closing argument, her voice a blend of fire and precision. "Your Honor, this case hinges on truth, not prejudice." She began pacing before the bench. "Ms. Lewis is a model tenant targeted for her race and her love for a dog who saved a life. Socks isn't a nuisance, he's a hero, and the evidence proves it." She gestured to Harold, who sat tall in the gallery, and then to the grainy photos of the hallway debunked as pipe leaks. "The plaintiff's claims are baseless, built on bias and exaggeration. We ask for dismissal and for Miss Lewis to keep her home." Pearson rose for the plaintiff's, closing, his tone polished but strained. "Rules, our rules," he insisted. "Ms. Lewis violated her lease, and one act of alleged heroism doesn't erase that." He avoided Harold's testimony, focusing instead on community standards and tenant responsibility. But his words lacked the conviction of before, and Joanne sensed the room shifting, the gallery's murmurs now tinged with doubt. Judge Whitaker leaned forward, his voice gravelly. "I've heard enough. This court will take a brief recess before I deliver my ruling." The gavel fell and Joanne's stomach lurched. The wait was agony, each minute stretching like hours. She stepped outside with Socks, the Atlanta heat wrapping around her like a blanket. A small crowd gathered, tenants, neighbors, even a local reporter who'd caught wind of the case. Their support buoyed her, but Brooks's earlier insult, calling Socks stupid, gnawed at her. She stroked Socks' fur, whispering, "You're my hero no matter what." Back in the courtroom, the tension was palpable. Judge Whitaker returned, his face stern but thoughtful. "This case is about more than a lease," he began, his voice carrying weight. "It's about justice and community. The plaintiff's evidence is weak, unsubstantiated complaints, misleading photos. But the defense has shown Ms. Lewis's character and her dog's extraordinary act." He paused, meeting Joanne's eyes. "Mr. Thompson's testimony cannot be ignored. Socks saved a life, and Ms. Lewis acted with compassion." Joanne's breath hitched, hope rising like a tide. Whitaker continued, "I find no grounds for eviction. Ms. Lewis may remain in her apartment, and Socks is hereby recognized as a life alert animal exempt from the pet ban." The gallery erupted in cheers, and Joanne clutched Maya's arm, tears streaming down her face. Socks yipped as if sensing the victory, his tail a blur. But the climax peaked with an unexpected twist. Whitaker turned to Officer Brooks, his tone sharp. "Your conduct in this court was unprofessional, officer. Your remarks were inflammatory and irrelevant. I expect a formal apology to Miss Lewis, and I'll be notifying your department." Brooks's face reddened, his jaw tight, but he nodded stiffly. The rebuke was a public shaming, and Joanne felt a surge of vindication. The man who'd mocked her and Socks now faced consequences. As the courtroom emptied, tenants approached Joanne, offering hugs and apologies for staying silent. Harold clapped her shoulder, saying, "You did it, Joanne." She smiled, her voice choked. "We did it." The reporter snapped photos, promising a story that would spotlight Socks' heroism. Outside, the crowd grew, and Joanne heard whispers of a petition to reform Crestwood's racist rules. Hargrove slipped out quietly. His power diminished, his case in tatters. Joanne stood tall, Socks in her arms, the weight of years of slights lifting. The victory was hers, but it was more than personal. It was a stand against injustice, a beacon for others. The fight had been grueling, but the truth had prevailed, and Socks, her scruffy savior, was the heart of it all. Victory tasted sweet, but for Joanne Lewis, it was a quiet moment with Socks that truly grounded her. As she stepped out of the Fulton County Courthouse, the late afternoon sun bathed Atlanta in a golden glow, softening the city's sharp edges. Socks scampered at her feet, his leash loose, his mismatched ears perked as if he knew they'd won. The crowd outside, neighbors, tenants, strangers moved by the story, cheered softly, their voices a warm hum. Joanne smiled, her heart full, but her legs trembled from the day's weight. She'd faced down Hargrove Brooks in a system that seemed rigged against her, and now, for the first time in months, she could breathe. Maya walked beside her, her briefcase swinging, her face alight with pride. "You were incredible in there, Joanne," she said, her voice bright. "This isn't just a win for you, it's a win for everyone who's been pushed around." Joanne nodded, clutching Sock's leash. "Couldn't have done it without you," she replied, her voice soft but steady. The reporter, a young woman named Carla, jotted notes promising a front-page story in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. "Socks is a hero," Carla said, snapping a photo of him mid-yawn. Joanne chuckled, stroking his fur. "Always has been." The ride back to Crestwood Towers felt surreal. The cab driver, a chatty man with a thick Jamaican accent, had heard about the case on the radio. "That dog's a legend, Mon," he said, grinning in the rearview mirror. Joanne laughed, a sound she hadn't heard from herself in weeks. Socks curled up in her lap, his warmth a reminder of what she'd fought for. As the cab wove through Buckhead's tree-lined streets, Joanne's mind drifted to the future. The judge's ruling meant she could stay, and Socks' new status as a life-alert animal protected him from the pet ban. But the victory was bigger than her apartment. It had cracked open a door, exposing the biases woven into Crestwood's rules. Back at the building, the lobby was quieter than usual, the doorman offering a wide smile. "Welcome home, Ms. Lewis," he said, tipping his cap. Joanne felt a pang of gratitude for these small kindnesses often overlooked in her battle. Up on the 12th floor, her apartment welcomed her like an old friend. The quilt on her couch, the photos of her kids, the faint scent of lavender from her candles. It was all hers, untouched by Hargrove's threats. She let Socks off his leash and he darted to his water bowl, lapping noisily. Joanne sank into her armchair, exhaustion and relief washing over her in waves. That evening, her phone buzzed with calls and texts. Her daughter Tanya in Chicago sobbed with joy. "Mama, I'm so proud of you. You fought for Socks like you fought for us." Her son Marcus in Seattle promised to visit soon with his kids. Even her youngest Lena, who rarely called, sent a text. "You're a badass mom." Joanne laughed through tears, each message a thread stitching her family closer. Neighbors stopped by, some with apologies for staying silent, others with treats for Socks. Harold Thompson brought a homemade pecan pie, his eyes twinkling. "Figured we'd celebrate," he said, and they shared a slice, reminiscing about the night Socks saved him. The community response grew beyond her floor. By morning, Carla's article hit the stands, its headline bold, "Scruffy Hero Dog Saves, Life Defies Racist Eviction." The story detailed Joanne's fight, Harold's testimony, and Brooks's reprimand, painting Socks as a furry champion. Social media X especially lit up with posts. Socks the Hero trended locally, with users sharing photos of their own pets and stories of unfair landlords. A tenant group launched a petition to revise Crestwood's pet and tenant policies, calling out their discriminatory undertones. Joanne read the posts, stunned by the ripple effect. Her fight, once solitary, now echoed across the city. Officer Brooks's apology came swiftly, though it lacked warmth. A letter arrived typed and formal, stating he regretted any offense caused during the hearing. Joanne read it twice. Her lips pursed. It wasn't heartfelt, but it was public, printed in the paper alongside Carla's article. The backlash against Brooks was fierce. Ex-users called for his suspension, and a community group planned a rally outside the precinct. Joanne didn't want revenge, but she felt a quiet satisfaction knowing his words hadn't gone unchecked. Hargrove, meanwhile, kept a low profile. Rumors swirled that the Crestwood board was re-evaluating its rules under pressure from tenants and bad press. Evelyn Carter, the neighbor who'd sparked the complaint, sent a curt note, "I was mistaken about the smell." "Congratulations." Joanne tucked it away unmoved. She'd won not by bitterness, but by standing firm, and that was enough. As days passed, Joanne settled back into her routine, but it felt different lighter. She walked Socks openly now, no longer sneaking at dawn. Tenants greeted her warmly, some asking to pet Socks, others sharing their own stories of prejudice. A local vet offered free checkups for Socks, calling him Atlanta's finest. Joanne's arthritis still ached. Her pension still stretched thin, but her spirit was renewed. She'd faced a Goliath, and won not just for herself but for others who'd felt unseen. Sitting on her balcony one evening, Socks snoozing at her feet, Joanne watched the city lights flicker. The battle had changed her, sharpened her resolve. She thought of her mother, who'd taught her to fight with dignity, and her kids who'd inherit this story. The opening wasn't just a return to normal, it was a new chapter 1 where her voice and socks would never be silenced again. Sunlight filtered through Joanne Lewis's apartment window, casting soft patterns on the quilt draped over her couch. It had been a month since the courtroom victory, and the rhythm of her life had settled, yet the echoes of that day rippled through her days like a stone skipped across a pond. Socks lay sprawled on the rug, his paws twitching in a dream, his snores a gentle reminder of the fight they'd won. Joanne sipped her morning coffee, her arthritis less bothersome today, and let her mind wander over the changes that had unfolded not just in her world, but in the community around her. The Crestwood Towers felt different now, less like a fortress of wealth and more like a neighborhood. Tenants who'd once passed her with curt nods now stopped to chat, their smiles genuine. A young couple on the 10th floor, inspired by socks, adopted a rescue dog, proudly showing Joanne photos. The petition to reform the building's rules had gained traction with over 200 signatures, and a meeting scheduled with the board. Joanne wasn't leading the charge. Her days of courtroom battles were done, but she attended the first tenant group meeting, her presence a quiet force. When a woman thanked her for waking us up, Joanne felt her mother's pride in her bones. The media attention hadn't faded entirely. Carla's article had sparked a local TV segment, Atlanta's Unsung Heroes, featuring Joanne and Socks. The crew filmed in her apartment, Socks stealing the show by nabbing a treat mid-interview. Joanne had been nervous, her hand smoothing her dress a dozen times, but the host, a warm black woman named Denise, put her at ease. "You're a trailblazer," Denise said, and Joanne shook her head, laughing. "I'm just a grandma with a dog." But as she watched the segment later, Socks curled beside her, she saw the truth. Her story had lit a spark, showing others they could stand up too. Officer Brooks's apology had grown into a small reckoning. The rally outside his precinct drew dozens, their signs demanding accountability. A viral X post with 10,000 reposts called his remarks a symptom of deeper bias, and the police department, under pressure, assigned Brooks to sensitivity training. Joanne followed the news from a distance, her heart torn. She didn't hate Brooks. She'd seen too much of life to hold grudges, but she prayed he'd learn that his words would never wound another. When a second letter arrived, handwritten this time, admitting his poor judgment, she tucked it away, a sign that change, however slow, was possible. Hargrove's influence waned, his once iron grip on Crestwood loosening. The board, stung by bad press, voted to revise the pet policy, allowing case-by-case approvals with no exorbitant fees. Evelyn Carter moved out her departure unmarked by fanfare. Joanne heard she'd grumbled about standards slipping, but the rumor brought only a wry smile. She'd spent years weathering such jabs. They no longer stung. Instead, she focused on the new faces at tenant meetings, diverse voices demanding transparency. Crestwood wasn't perfect, but it was listening, and that was a start. Joanne's kids visited more often, their calls no longer rushed. Tanya flew in for a weekend, bringing her daughter, who squealed as Socks licked her face. Marcus sent a framed photo of the article captioned, "Mama's a legend." Lena, the quiet one, surprised Joanne with a call, admitting she'd bragged about her at work. "You showed him, Mom," she said, and Joanne's eyes misted. Her family had always been her anchor, but the case had drawn them closer, their pride a balm for years of struggle. Socks, now an official Life Alert animal, wore a new tag with pride, though he was still the same scruffy terrier who chased his tail and begged for scraps. The vet's free checkups revealed a clean bill of health, and a local pet store donated a year's supply of food, calling Socks our favorite customer. Joanne marveled at his fame, but to her he was simply her companion, the one who'd nudged her through grief and loneliness. She'd started training him with basic alert commands just in case another neighbor needed him. Harold, fully recovered, joked that Socks was on call for the 12th floor. Reflecting on it all, Joanne felt a shift within herself. She'd always been resilient, but the fight had forged something fiercer, a belief in her own voice. She thought of the black women before her, like her mother, who'd faced worse with less and still stood tall. Their strength flowed through her, a legacy she now passed to her kids and grandkids. She began journaling, a habit she'd abandoned years ago, filling pages with thoughts on justice, community, and Socks' antics. One entry read, "I didn't fight for glory. I fought for home. And home is bigger than four walls." On quiet evenings, Joanne sat on her balcony, the city's hum a familiar song. Socks dozed at her feet, his warmth a constant. She'd look at the skyline, its light steady against the dusk, and feel a peace she hadn't known in years. The battle had left scars. Doubt, fear, the sting of Brooks' words, but it had also left gifts, connection, purpose, a community waking up. She wasn't naive. She knew prejudice lingered in Crestwood and beyond, but she also knew hope, and that was enough to keep going. As she turned the page on this chapter, Joanne felt ready not just to live, but to speak, to share, to be seen. Her story and socks was a reminder that even the smallest among us could change the world, one bark, one stand, one heart at a time. Joanne Lewis's journey had come full circle, a testament to the power of standing firm. From the courtroom's harsh lights to the quiet warmth of her balcony, she'd learned that courage isn't loud, it's the steady beat of a heart refusing to break. Socks, her scruffy hero, had sparked a movement, proving that even the smallest among us can shift the world. Now, as Joanne looked out at Atlanta's skyline, her story wasn't just hers, it was a beacon for every black woman, every underdog, every soul told they don't belong. Her fight had changed. Crestwood Towers challenged a biased system and reminded a city that justice starts with one voice. This isn't just a tale to read and forget, friends. It's a call to see yourself in Joanne, to find your own socks, whether it's a cause, a loved one, or a truth you hold dear. We've all faced moments when the world feels stacked against us, when rules seem designed to silence. But Joanne showed us that speaking up, even when your voice shakes, can move mountains. She didn't need wealth or power, just love for her dog, and a stubborn belief in what's right. That's the legacy she leaves us, a challenge to stand tall, to fight for home wherever that may be. So, what's your story? Maybe it's a neighbor you can lift up, a rule you can question, or a kindness you can share. Start small like Joanne did and watch the ripples grow. Share her story with your friends, your family, your church group. Let's keep Socks the Hero trending, not just for likes, but for change. Head over to the Black Women channel on YouTube, subscribe, comment. Tell us how Joanne's fight inspires you. Like this story, share it on X and tag someone who needs to hear it. Every click, every word builds a community that says no to injustice. And don't stop there. Check out local tenant groups, support Black voices in your town, or volunteer at a shelter to honor dogs like Socks. If you're in Atlanta, join the Crestwood petition. Make sure those rules stay fair. Your action, no matter how small, keeps Joanne's spark alive. We're stronger together, lifting each other up, just like Harold lifted Joanne, just like Socks lifted them all. Joanne's still out there walking Socks, smiling at neighbors, living her truth. She's proof that home is worth fighting for. And so are you. So stand up, speak out, and let's make the world a little kinder, one story at a time.